Ukraine stands strong against the forces of the Russian invasion. Yesterday, Russian President Vladimir Putin addressed the nation, reports BBC News Ukraine. Besides his usual rhetoric of blaming Ukrainians for being neo-Nazis and NATO for planning the invasion of Russia, the Russian leader said that Moscow decided to suspend participation in the Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty with the United States. The treaty provides for limits on the number of nuclear warheads, intercontinental ballistic missiles, and bombers for Russia and the United States, thereby ending the uncontrolled arms race. He also instructed the Ministry of Defense and Rosatom to ensure readiness for testing Russian nuclear weapons. At the same time, Putin promised that Russia will do tests only if the US does them first. NATO has already called on Russia to reconsider its decision on the nuclear deal. As Putin explained, NATO requires Russia to return to the treaty, including the admission of Western experts to Russian facilities. But this is the theater of the absurd in the current conditions. US State Secretary Antony Blinken also regrets Russia's decision. According to him, the United States is ready to discuss with Russia the issue of limiting strategic weapons at any time. He added that the US will be watching closely what Russia is actually doing and that the Biden administration will ensure appropriate measures are taken to ensure the security of the US and its allies. President of Ukraine Volodymyr Zelensky said that the threats of Putin to resume nuclear weapons tests are intimidation, to which no one seriously reacts, reports Interfax Ukraine. He also noticed with regret that representatives of the Kremlin already communicate as terrorists. The only difference is that the terrorists are wearing masks, and in Russia they don't even hide their faces anymore, the president said. The Ukrainian Foreign Ministry called on the international community to provide a decisive response to Russia's aggressive behavior, to take urgent joint measures to prevent and counter any forms of nuclear blackmail by a terrorist state. The Highlights of Ukraine is an uncommercial initiative of just two people, and we need your help to grow. Russian forces shelled the city of Kherson, reports Suspilne. There were hits in a car park, residential areas, a high-rise building and a public transport stop. At least 5 people died, another 16 were hospitalized. The President of Ukraine, in his evening video address, expressed his condolences to all those who have lost their loved ones. He pointed out that this Russian shelling did not and could not have any military purpose. I am confident that we will put the terrorist state in its place, all together, Ukrainians and the world, stressed Volodymyr Zelensky. Yesterday, US President Joe Biden presented a historic speech in Warsaw, Poland, after his visit to Ukraine, reports BBC News Ukraine. Biden said that Ukraine's allies will not tire of supporting it in the face of Russia's full-scale aggression, and Kyiv will never be defeated by Russia. Quote, "There should be no doubt our support for Ukraine will not waver. NATO will not be divided and we will not tire. President Putin's craven lust for land and power will fail. And Ukrainian people's love for their country will prevail. The democratic states of the world will defend their freedom today, tomorrow and forever." Unquote. He stressed that 1 year ago the world was bracing for the fall of Kyiv. Quote, "Well, I have just come from a visit to Kyiv and I can report Kyiv stands strong, Kyiv stands proud, it stands tall, and most important, it stands free." Unquote. Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni visited Kyiv yesterday, where she met Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, reports European Pravda. She announced that in addition to the SAMP-T air defense systems, which Italy plans to transfer to Ukraine together with France, Rome will send other air defense systems as well. In particular, she was talking about Spada and Skyguard systems, which will help to protect infrastructure and citizens. She stressed that when there is an attack against the state, all weapons are defensive. At the same time, currently there is no question of sending aircraft. This decision must be made with international partners, said Meloni. The Italian Prime Minister informed that her country is preparing to host a conference on the reconstruction of Ukraine, which is to be held in April 2023. She expressed confidence that Italy can play a leading role in the issue of reconstruction of Ukraine as it has the needed expertise. President Volodymyr Zelensky signed a joint declaration with the Italian Prime Minister. The declaration states that Italy condemns the Russian aggression against Ukraine, takes into account Ukraine's path towards the accession to the EU and NATO, as well as the potential of developing bipartisan relations. The separate point is Kyiv and Rome supporting the program for exporting Ukrainian grain, as well as the EU's decision to give Ukraine a candidate country status. Moreover, the Italian side expresses its support of a global peace summit that has to be convened when conditions allow, and a fair peace agreement for Ukraine based on Ukraine's peace formula. If you like what we do and would like to tip us, you can now do so directly to our PayPal. Check out the link in the description to this episode for more details. And as usual, you can subscribe to our Patreon. In gratitude for your help, we will give you access to a series of exclusive episodes on wartime life in Ukraine. We call on you to demand from governments of your countries to impose the toughest sanctions possible on Russia and its citizens to stop their invasion of Ukraine.
For more on this, I am now joined by our guests, Fars Zarland, Professor of Political Science at Kabul University. In London is Ozala Nemat, Director of Development Research Group, a consultancy focusing on women and youth development in Central and South Asian countries. And in Islamabad is Ayaz Wazir, a career diplomat and Pakistan's former ambassador to Afghanistan. A warm welcome to you all. Thank you very much for being on Inside Story. Ayaz, I want to start by trying to figure out exactly what you think happened. I mean, have you been able to pinpoint exactly why the border crossing was closed?
This border and the one which Kamal Haider also mentioned, Chaman, these are the two important crossing points, though there are others like Ghulam Khan and Angurada that also some transaction takes place, but the other two are the major links between the two. Now, what happened actually this day was that, according to the report, a patient was brought to Pakistan for treatment, and the unwritten agreement between the two sides for quite some time was that with each patient, one attendant would be allowed without a visa. This I heard from people around. I'm not privy to the official document. So on this day, the patient had one attendant with him, which was turned down, according to the media report by the Pakistani security, that you better get a visa and then come. So on this, the tension grew to this point that the Afghani gentleman on the spot, who was the senior one or in charge of the Turkham checkpost from the Taliban side, immediately closed the border, which still is closed. And so it flared up and the firing took place between the two. Now, this issue of the patient is not that important, but it flared up because the trust deficit between the two sides is an increase, gradual increase, since the Taliban have taken over. In fact, between Islamabad and Kabul, the trust deficit has always been there. At times it widens, then it comes down. Its roots are deep down in the early days of the creation of Pakistan. But let me leave that there. So the tension increases with some things like this, because the border management has been a problem between the two sides. Then comes in the Durand Line issue between the two Afghan side, though unofficially or officially, even one can call, is recognizing the Durand Line, but publicly they are hesitant to admit. And Pakistan considers it as an international border with Afghanistan.
Obviously, the issue goes a lot deeper than just issues over visas. Faz, from an Afghanistan point of view, I mean, a Taliban-appointed commissioner at the crossing said that Pakistan has not been abiding by its commitments. What are the commitments, and how is this issue being perceived in Afghanistan?
Yes. Thank you. Actually, since the inception of Pakistan never support a Kabul-based government. They never supported a government which is looking after Afghanistan as a united and sovereign country. Pakistan has also supported anti-government, anti-state factors. If we see even the return of Taliban could not satisfy Pakistan's wish to have a neighbor on the side which could be assisted in many ways, economical, political, and social, Taliban, once they returned to power, they were believing that Pakistan will stay as a close friend, as a close ally, and as a close supporter. But since the Taliban are back in power, they have been demonized. They have been scrutinized by Pakistani governments and military. For their first time in the history of Afghanistan, especially the recent history, Pakistan aerial power, they bombarded Afghanistan. They got inside Afghanistan while it was considered a severe anti-state act by Taliban in Kabul. And it has created a lot of mistrust between both governments. Secondly, Pakistan itself domestically is facing too many tensions, political, economic, and social. The Pakistani democratic leadership and also military leadership has not been able to stabilize their own court, their own country. So they have been looking for some blaming in the region. Recently, they have been having such troubles and problems not only with Afghanistan, but Iran and also India. There are problems have been arose. The very last thing is the transit agreements between Afghanistan and Pakistan. There is a very prominent agreement by the name of APTA, which has not been respected by Pakistan, and it has never been considered as an official document by Pakistan in past many years. And then once the Taliban took power, they also raised the issue of APTA to be implemented. Due to APTA, Pakistan will have a transit route to Central Asia through Afghanistan, while Afghanistan will have a route to Wagah to take its exports and import to India, which is not respected, and it has been creating a lot of problem for Afghans economically, socially, and politically.
Okay, Ozala, I would like to bring you in here. Obviously, this is a big humanitarian issue. Who's paying the price here on both sides of the border? Who are the real people that are being affected in their daily lives?
Thank you very much for this question. Just before I go to the humanitarian aspect of this, I have to remind our audience that this border is laying on the Durand line, which is still contested. Most of the Afghans, in particular those who live on both sides of this border, are not formally recognizing the Durand line. And so the contestation is reflected in some of these reactions that we see are somehow supposedly out of the government control. And it's obvious that even though Afghanistan today has the most Pakistani-friendly regime in place, still there are tensions, there are situations like this. So let's not forget that within this context, the closure of the border is also a political act, and it's like a pressure point by the parties involved in order to pressurize each other. And now, who is paying the price? From a humanitarian perspective, it's absolutely clear that it's the Afghans who are paying the huge price here, because the Afghans are in a very concerning situation at the moment. There is a humanitarian crisis in the country with absolute majority of the people in need of food, immediate services, and in particular medical services, which is getting worse actually due to the limitations that Afghanistan is facing today. So a lot of those patients who are in urgent need, elderly particularly, who are in urgent need of caring and treatments in Pakistani cities of Peshawar or Islamabad, are now the prime affected people. In addition to that, Torkham border, similar to Chaman border, as was mentioned by your other guest, are places where the livelihoods of absolute majority of those who are resided locally or regionally in those areas is depending. So people in the local level are losing their jobs. The traders from both sides, the Pakistani side as well as the Afghan side, are also losing a lot when we have more than, like your reporter says, more than 300 or 500 trucks are kind of stuck there. And we have seen so many times this happen. It's not the first time, unfortunately. And the firing is because I think there is this tension that is out of the control of the states who cannot really maintain that level of stability there to have it. So conclusively, it's the people who are paying the price, like any other tension, like any other conflict, and particularly those whose health conditions or livelihoods is directly depending on this border being opened.
Ayaz, obviously this isn't just an issue in Afghanistan. I mean, it's an important trade route for Pakistan as well. I mean, how much of an appetite is there to keep this border closed, or is there any pressure coming on authorities from the people that live in the area that need to do trade in the area from the Pakistani side to open the border up as soon as possible?
Well, if you permit me, I'll make a comment on what my friend from Kabul said about the earlier reaction of Pakistan towards Kabul. He said no government in Kabul was recognized in the true sense by Pakistan. In fact, let's not create things from ourselves. I'll give you a historical perspective that after creation of Pakistan in 1947, in August 47, Pakistan applied for membership of the UN, and on 30th of September 1947, all the members of the UN voted for Pakistan to become a member except for Afghanistan, which cast negative vote, didn't vote for Pakistan. They raised objection. But that objection remained for 20 days only. But on 20th October 47, they took it back. But the first stone was cast by the Afghans, not by the Pakistanis. The rest is a history. If we go into, let's avoid blame game. What I said, I challenge my friend from Afghanistan to check with the UN. If I have said a word more than what actual history is, then you can blame me for it. But the first beginning was made by the Afghans, and they still have reservation on the Durand line, which we consider as an established fact, because that was done by the British government in 1893 when Pakistan was not there. It was a part of the Indian subcontinent. The British and the Afghan ruler, Abdurrahman Khan, Sir Durand Line, they signed this agreement between them, and Pakistan got it as a successor state. My friend should check with the UN, and according to the international law, that a successor state inherits what treaty has already been made. So it was not drawn by Pakistan. Pakistan got it. But the Afghans did negative vote, or they refused to vote for Pakistan to become a member of the UN. So let's bury it there. Now come down to the trade or the trade activity on the border. Well, that definitely affects both sides. The Afghans more because they are dependent mainly on importing goods from Pakistan, though they have access to the other neighboring countries also, having trade with them, but mostly focuses on Pakistan for trade, for education, for treatment of their patients. So this affects them mostly, but certainly our people near the border have close links with it, because they mainly depend on this transit trade for their daily earning, because in the tribal area, there is hardly anything for people to live on. So this is the only source, I would say, of income of those people. So they are naturally concerned. They would love that the border remains open.
Okay. Obviously, this has a massive social impact. Faz, millions of Afghans live in Pakistan and many commute on a daily basis between the two countries. I mean, this ties as much division as there is and as much history as there is, like we heard outlined there, between the two countries. There's actually a lot in common, and there is a brotherhood between these two nations as well, isn't there? So what does that do to the people that rely on that daily commute between Afghanistan and Pakistan?
If we look at the historical perspective, we can come up with a lot of detailed evidence and perspectives that Pakistan have always used the Durand Line issue as a pressure point on Afghan government in Kabul. They know that Afghanistan is a landlocked, and they use this Durand Line or this border as an issue to sanctuary to shelter all those anti-state factors on this line on both sides and provide them support to somehow destabilize inside Afghanistan. And that is why the Afghan government in Kabul never considered Pakistan as a friend. When Taliban were resisting the U.S. occupation in Afghanistan in past 20 years, they were sheltered, protected, and supported by Pakistan government and Pakistan people. But once they return to power, they have been having in their mind and heart all those miseries and difficulties that they went through in past 20 years of resistance in Pakistan. As their leaders were killed, some of their leaders were detained, many of their leaders were sold out to U.S. and Guantanamo. So that revenge is there. Secondly, the mistrust, previously your guest has aimed that mistrust and the trust deficit is always between Pakistan and Afghanistan, and much of the blame comes to Pakistan. And the very last thing is that if we consider this border as a transit route, why Pakistan is not abiding itself to the WTO, as Afghanistan is member also of the WTO in Pakistan, and the international laws and regulations of the transit, why they are not allowing Afghan goods transports to the Wagah, to the India, and also why not allowing Afghan goods to be transported on its momentary and seasonal route to Karachi. And the very last thing is that the blame game has always come from Pakistan. If Pakistan recognizes the Diron line as a border, so what have they done to this area, like to the development of this area, to the harmony and stability of this area, and what have been achieved by them? We know that still Taliban have been blaming regarding the recent attacks and resistance and turmoil that is going on since the Taliban took power to Pakistani side, that many of the attackers, many of the instability factors are still coming from that side, while Pakistan has been blaming Taliban for Pakistani Taliban shelters. And so that blame game is always there. But we should not forget that that Britons in 1893 have never signed an agreement with Afghanistan. It was a buffer zone, and Afghanistan at that time was playing a buffer state, and that region was considered as a buffer zone between the imperialist Anglo and Afghan government at that time.
Yeah, indeed. I just want to move away from the history for the moment, and Orzala, you touched on this a little bit earlier, and I want you to expand on it. Many Afghans travel to Pakistan for medical treatment. Can you explain just how big an issue that is, and what's happening to them now, and our lives being put at risk with this border closure?
Precisely, as you are well aware, and I'm sure the two guests in the program as well, unfortunately, due to the long years of conflict and also due to the current Taliban authorities' bans on education, there is a massive shortage of medical services, particularly medical at the more advanced level of medical diagnosis and treatment for the people in Afghanistan. So Afghans are left with no other options but to rely on their immediate neighbors. In the past, India was a very significant destination, but because of the visa and restrictions on travels, no longer people can go to India. So everyone is back to using this option of saving a life and then taking the person who is ill. If we all look around, our relatives, our friends, our networks of people, everyone, on average, every family have been to Pakistan once or twice at least, just for the medical treatment. So it's quite significant. What is really bothering, and particularly as Mr. Ayaz Khan was also saying in his comments, how this immediate issue was triggered because something was agreed between Afghanistan and Pakistan in the recent months, which was because there is no visa now issued in an easy way. There are black market visas with $1,000, $1,200 or so dollars that you have to pay. You can get a Pakistani visa. But for the medical reasons, because of the pressure from the people, the Pakistani government and the Taliban have made an agreement that, okay, there should be another procedure to allow the patients with one attendant to cross the border for the medical treatment. I know my own relatives living in the eastern Afghanistan who used this like 2 weeks ago. Husband and wife very ill with their one son got to the border and crossed it and went for treatment and returned back to Afghanistan. So if something like this exists as a neighborhood, as a brotherhood, we were talking about it earlier, why is it immediately stopped? And that obviously creates tension. And we are talking about a very unstable situation. People are in deep economic crisis. And of course, these things trigger something that is originated in history. We cannot pack history or fold it in a folder somewhere. This is a history that affects people's life. I never said that about Pakistan. Pakistan didn't exist in the time the Durand Line was created. I think historical discussions were enough made before me, so I will not repeat it. But it's just a realization because of that contestation that exists, people do not recognize this. And therefore, when there are change in the policies for whatever reason, whether it is geopolitics or pressure point, as mentioned before, or any other reasons, could be random reasons, it triggers immediate reaction of the people and hence results into the tensions that we are seeing today.
Okay. Ayaz, I want to finish with you just very briefly. As a former ambassador, how does this get resolved quickly and peacefully and to get the border reopened for everyone that desperately needs to use it as a trade and supply route?
Well, give me just a moment to comment on why this triggers up so very often with the Taliban particularly. Because the Taliban, before the Taliban coming into power, the visa restrictions were there, but they were not so stringent during Karzai or Ashraf Ghani's period as they are now. Now the Taliban has taken that very seriously. That, look, we are your friends. For us, it should have been a little more lenient than making it difficult. That is the real bone of contention, whereas its links go very deep in the history.
Okay.
So if we
just quickly though, how do we move on from that?
I was just going to mention it. I think the first and foremost or the most important element is that both the governments in Islamabad and Kabul should accept and regret the past mistakes. I'm not going into the detail. Both have committed. Islamabad have committed, Kabul have committed. They should forgive and forget and regret and then move on. Until and unless that is addressed, these things will keep cropping up and straining our relations. Whatever effort we may make, something will happen and will again shadow that development. There are good patches in our history, but again, this thing comes up and the good development between the two pushes to the back and the tension or the trust deficit increases. So for that to address, we have to go into the history and the two governments have to come up with this idea that we regret on our deeds in the past and we move like two independent sovereign states hand in hand and resolve the issues of our people.
Well, let's hope for everyone's sake that is affected that those two governments can come to a resolution as quickly as possible. Thank you so much. That is Faz Zarland in Kabul, Ozala Namat in London and Ayaz Wazir in Islamabad. Thank you very much for being guests on Inside Story. This episode was produced by Shabina Khan, Nihad Al-Abdi, Fongi Nguyen and Paul Taylor. Studio sound was by Yara Atala. The program was edited by Alexander Kohler, Lynn Nguyen and Joe DeFrias.